Before a boy fell from the sky, a man threw a child from the Acropolis. They were both acts of genius. They were both committed by the same man. His name means cunning worker. The ancient Greeks said his statues were so lifelike they had to be chained down to keep them from walking away. He invented the axe. He invented the sail. He built the most famous prison in history. And when he needed to escape that prison, he built wings out of feathers and wax and strapped them to his only son. This is the story they never told you. This is the story of Daedalus. The greatest inventor in all of mythology began his story as a murderer. Before the wings, before the labyrinth, before Crete, there was Athens. And in Athens, there was a man whose hands could make the impossible real. His name was Daedalus. His statues had open eyes and separated feet, while every other sculptor carved rigid figures with closed legs. They looked like they were about to step off the pedestal. He invented the axe, the awl, the bevel. He designed the first masts and sails for ships. By any measure, the most gifted craftsman the ancient world had ever seen. Until a boy arrived at his workshop. His nephew. The ancient sources cannot even agree on the child's name. Ovid calls him Partridge, Apollodorus calls him Daedalus, others call him Icarus. But every source agrees on this. The boy was a prodigy. Daedalus took him in as an apprentice. The boy was supposed to learn at the feet of the master. Instead, he eclipsed him. He found a fish spine on the shore, studied its serrated teeth, and invented the saw. Then he joined two iron rods with a rivet and invented the compass. A child had just created two tools that would reshape craftsmanship for the rest of human history. And what grew inside Daedalus was not pride. It was jealousy. The corrosive jealousy of a man who has built his entire identity on being the best. So he took the boy to the top of the Acropolis, and he threw him off the edge. The goddess Athena caught the boy mid-fall and transformed him. Feathers pushed through his skin. His arms became wings. His scream became a bird call. He was no longer a boy. He was a partridge. Small, brown, a bird that stays close to the ground. A bird that never flies high, because it remembers the fall. Daedalus was tried for murder before the Areopagus and convicted. He fled to Crete, where King Minos welcomed him. A ruler who controlled the most powerful navy in the world had just acquired the most brilliant inventor alive. And then Minos's wife came to him with a request that would have horrified any other man. And this is where Daedalus made the second mistake that would eventually kill his son. King Minos had prayed to Poseidon for a divine bull, promising to sacrifice it. When the bull arrived, it was so magnificent that Minos kept it and sacrificed an inferior one instead. A god noticed. Poseidon cursed Minos's wife Pasiphae to desire the bull. Not her choice, not her sin, but a god's revenge. Pasiphae went to Daedalus. He was a fugitive with no leverage. Refusing the queen could mean exile or death. So he did what he always did. He built a hollow wooden cow, covered in real cowhide, so realistic it fooled an animal sent by a god. What came next should not have existed. A creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull. His real name was Asterion, Starry One. History would call him the Minotaur. And when the Minotaur grew ferocious and consumed human flesh, Minos needed something to contain it. He went to Daedalus, and Daedalus built the labyrinth at Knossos, so complex that even he barely escaped after constructing it. Daedalus built the wooden cow. Daedalus built the cage for what came out of it. Think about that for a moment. Without his skill, there would have been no wooden cow. Without the wooden cow, no Minotaur. Without the Minotaur, no labyrinth. And without the labyrinth, 14 young Athenians would not have walked into darkness every 9 years, 7 young men, 7 young women, never to return. This was the pattern, forming around Daedalus. In Athens, his genius killed a boy. In Crete, his genius birthed a monster and built the cage where it fed on children. Every time he created something, his creation turned toward destruction. He was not evil. He was brilliant, and he was obedient, and the combination was catastrophic. He never asked whether he should build, and each solution became the foundation for the next disaster. But it gets worse, because the man who built the prison was about to become its prisoner. Theseus arrived in Crete as one of the 14. 7 young men, 7 young women, all of them walking into the labyrinth to feed the thing that lived inside it. But Theseus had no intention of dying. And Daedalus, the man who built the prison, the man who caused the monster, knew it. He went to Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos. He told her to give Theseus a ball of thread, unwind it on the way in, follow it back on the way out. A simple solution to the most complex structure ever built. That was Daedalus. He could always find a flaw in his own work. Theseus killed the Minotaur. He followed the thread back through the corridors. He took Ariadne and fled Crete before dawn. And when Minos discovered what had happened, when he realized someone had helped Theseus escape, there was only one man on the island capable of solving the labyrinth. Minos did not execute Daedalus. He did something worse. He locked him inside his own creation. Daedalus, the architect, imprisoned in the architecture. And not alone. Minos threw in Daedalus's son as well, a boy named Icarus. Icarus's mother was a woman named Nausicaa. She was a slave, the property of King Minos. She appears in exactly one ancient source, the Bibliotheca of Apollodorus, and then vanishes from every other version of this story. Every retelling, every painting, every poem. She is not there. We do not know what happened to her when Minos sealed her son inside the labyrinth. We do not know if she was alive to hear about it. We know her name. That is almost all we know. Nausicaa. One line in one text. The most erased mother in all of mythology. Daedalus had lost everything. His freedom, his workshop, his tools. And now the boy, the only person in the world who still needed him, was trapped in this place because of what Daedalus had done. He had built the wooden cow. He had caused the Minotaur. He had built the labyrinth. He had helped Theseus escape. Every decision, every invention, every act of genius had led to this corridor, this darkness, this dead end. But Daedalus was still Daedalus, and his mind would not stop working. Minos controlled the harbors. His ships patrolled every sea lane around Crete. No vessel could leave without his knowledge. The land belonged to him. The sea belonged to him. But the sky, Minos did not rule the air. Daedalus began collecting feathers. He sorted them by size, smallest to largest, fastened them with thread at the center, and sealed them with wax at the base, curving each row to mimic real wings. And while he worked, his son played beside him. Icarus chased the feathers when the wind scattered them. He pressed clumps of yellow wax between his fingers, softening them with the warmth of his thumb. He did not understand what his father was building. The feathers and the wax were the only toys he had. We know what the wax will do. We know what the sun will do to it. And here is a boy, softening it with his hands, not knowing he is touching the thing that will kill him. Every tool Daedalus had ever built had been turned against someone. The axe, the saw, the wooden cow, the labyrinth. And now he was strapping his greatest invention to the arms of the only person he had left. He fitted the wings onto Icarus and gave the boy 2 warnings. Not 1, 2. Do not fly too high. The sun will melt the wax. Do not fly too low. The sea will soak the feathers. Fly the middle path. Follow me. Most people only remember the first warning. But the boy who flies too cautiously dies just as surely as the boy who flies too high. Daedalus looked at his son. His hands trembled. Tears ran down his cheeks. He kissed the boy. He did not know it was the last time. They stepped into the air. The feathers held. They rose. Below them, fishermen and shepherds looked up and believed they were seeing gods. Daedalus led the way, looking back constantly like a bird teaching a fledgling to fly. And for a few minutes, they were free. Icarus had spent his entire life inside walls. The workshop, the labyrinth, every space he had ever known had been enclosed. And now there were no walls. Imagine what that felt like. Wind on your face for the first time. The sea glittering below. The horizon stretching in every direction with no end, no edge, no locked door. Icarus did not fly higher because he was arrogant. He was a boy experiencing the only moment of freedom he had ever known, and he wanted more of it. But Icarus was already drifting. The sensation pulled him upward. The world below shrank into something small and distant. Every wing beat carried him higher. He left the middle path. He soared, and at first, nothing happened. That is the cruelest detail. For a stretch of time that must have felt like triumph, Icarus climbed higher, and the wings held, and everything was fine. Then the wax began to soften. The wax softened. The feathers scattered. He beat his bare arms. But arms without feathers cannot grip the air. He called out one word. Father. The blue-green water closed over his mouth as he called his father's name. That is how Ovid wrote it. A boy calling for his father. The most human sound in the world. And the sea swallowed it. Above, Daedalus looked back. He searched the sky for the shape of his son's wings. And then he looked down and saw feathers. Just feathers, drifting on the waves. He cursed his own genius, the brilliance that had built the wings, because it had killed the only person he had left. He recovered the body. He carried his son to a nearby island that had been called Daedalus. He buried the boy, and from that day forward, the island was called Icaria. The sea around it became the Icarian Sea, as if the world needed to remember a boy who fell from the sky, calling for his father. But the cruelest part of this story is not the fall. It is what watched from the trees. But here is where the story takes its cruelest turn. As Daedalus laid his son's body into the earth on that island, the island that would carry the boy's name forever after, something moved in the branches above him. A bird. Small, brown, unremarkable. A partridge. It watched him from a low branch. And then it called out, not in mourning, in satisfaction. Ovid tells us this detail, and most retellings leave it out entirely. Because the partridge was not just a bird. The partridge was Partridge, the nephew. The boy Daedalus had thrown from the top of the Acropolis years ago in Athens, consumed by jealousy when the child surpassed him. The boy Athena had caught mid-fall and transformed into a bird that would never forget what it meant to plummet from a great height. And now Partridge sat in the branches and watched his uncle bury another boy, a boy who had also fallen, a boy whose father had built the very thing that killed him. The partridge never flies high. It stays close to the ground, nests in hedgerows, keeps to the low brush. It remembers its fall. It remembers who pushed it. Think about that for a moment. A boy thrown from a height by Daedalus. A boy who fell from a height because of Daedalus. The first boy was saved by a goddess. The second boy was not. And the first boy watched the second boy's funeral from a tree, calling out in triumph at the symmetry of it. This is not a coincidence Ovid stumbled into. This is the architecture of the entire myth. The story of Icarus does not begin with wings and wax. It begins with a man who threw a child off a cliff. And it ends with the echo of that crime answering back across the years. Daedalus buried his son. He named the island Icaria. He named the sea around it the Icarian Sea. And then he did the only thing he knew how to do. He flew on. Alone. He reached Sicily. King Acropolis welcomed him, another fugitive genius, arriving at another king's court. The pattern was already repeating. But Daedalus did something he had never done. He built a temple to Apollo, and inside that temple he hung up his wings as an offering. Virgil records this in the Aeneid. The wings that had carried him and his son into the sky. He left them hanging in silence, where no one would ever wear them again. And yet he could not stop building. He designed heated baths, channeling hot springs through elaborate pipes. And even those pipes would kill. When Minos finally tracked him down, using a spiral conch shell as a trap, knowing only Daedalus could solve it, Acropolis' daughters poured boiling water through Daedalus' plumbing onto the king of Crete. The greatest ruler in the Aegean died in a bathtub, scalded to death by an invention Daedalus built. The axe, the wooden cow, the labyrinth, the wings, the pipes. Every beautiful thing he built became the instrument of someone's ruin. He lived out his remaining years in Sicily. His fame grew. His grief did not diminish. Somewhere in the Aegean, the sea still carried his son's name. The wings were his most beautiful invention, and his most devastating.